Hello everyone, I warmly welcome you to this new video. Today I have a very interesting test comparison. I'm talking about the possibility of effectively laying the boundary wire of a robotic lawnmower under the lawn surface. And for that, I've selected 5 ways to hopefully make this as simple as possible. Today, we'll examine these in detail to see the advantages and disadvantages of each method and determine which one is truly the best for laying the wire under the lawn surface as quickly, easily, and effectively as possible. So let's not waste any time. If you haven't already, definitely subscribe to this channel quickly and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any videos. I'll link the current prices of the materials used below in the video description. Thank you for your support, and now let's get started after the intro. The first task after you've chosen a robotic lawnmower is to mark out the corresponding area with the boundary wire so the lawnmower knows where it can and cannot go. Usually, the boundary wire is included in the delivery of the robotic lawnmower, so it doesn't matter if you've chosen a Worx, Gardena, or Husqvarna. This is more or less identical for all robotic lawnmowers. Alongside the lawnmower, you'll receive a roll of boundary wire and typically several ground pegs to fix the wire on the grass surface. But this method has disadvantages compared to the options I have behind me. Typically, I would just lay the boundary wire simply using the included ground pegs. This naturally has the obvious advantage that I don't need any special accessories or the like because, as I said, everything is already included in the delivery of the lawnmower, and I can start straight away. Also worth mentioning, this process is relatively quick. I simply grab the boundary wire and a ground peg, also needing a hammer, and then drive the first ground peg into the ground to fix the boundary wire accordingly. With the other hand, I then stretch the boundary wire a bit, grab the next ground pegs, and drive them into the ground a distance of about 40 to 50 centimeters, so they also fix the boundary wire here. As you can see, the whole process goes relatively quickly, so I'd estimate around 1 to 1.5 hours to mark out my entire area here. However, the boundary wire is only provisionally laid here and thereby has disadvantages, as one can already see. The most significant disadvantage of this laying method is simply that the boundary wire can be pulled out again by various influences, and I speak from experience, it definitely happens. Because sooner or later, if someone can't lift their feet properly, they'll get caught on the boundary wire and create these nice loops, which we then have to level out again over the entire area in the end. Option number 2 would be in the fall when the leaves are falling and you start raking them together. You also get caught on the boundary wire here, quite disadvantageous. And lastly, in the spring, so option number 3 when it comes to scarifying. At that point, you no longer know exactly where the boundary wire really goes, and if you run over it with the scarifier, you end up with little spaghetti, basically unusable for the robotic lawnmower. So at these points, the whole thing has to be patched up again, and in the end, it prepares you for much more work than if you had just properly laid the boundary wire underground from the start. And that's exactly why it's important to do it right from the start, and not start with any ground pegs, but rather lay the boundary wire properly underground from the beginning. So that's exactly why I've selected the top 5 methods for underground installation here. I would say let's start with the most well-known, or rather what everyone should actually have, namely a typical axe. I'm curious to see how well this really works. Option number 2 would then be with a shovel. The optimal would be, as mentioned, a lawn edger or the like, but I'll come back to that later as well. Option number 3 now consists of electrical devices, namely an angle grinder. In this case, a cordless angle grinder. Because we don't have a cable or the like here, which is also definitely quite practical. Option number 4 is a cordless grass trimmer, and option number 5, a cordless lawn edger. It's worth mentioning that I've already extensively introduced and tested all of these tools. If you haven't seen these videos yet, be sure to check them out. I'll link them for you right here on the info card. So now let's begin with the test. For this, I've selected some boundary wire, which I'll try to lay using these methods throughout the video. Let's start with option number 1, which I honestly have the least enthusiasm for, and that's with the axe. This is probably going to be quite a tough task. So I've prepared the test track here where I'll try to create a small channel with the axe, where I can then place the boundary wire accordingly. I'm curious to see how well this will work out. And this is the result of using the axe. I have to say, it's actually relatively okay. Definitely doable, but still, this method is quite inaccurate, as you can especially see in the middle here. Because it's not uncommon with the axe to veer off course by 2 to 3 meters to the side. And as a result, you end up with quite a wide channel, which isn't necessary. We only need an extremely narrow channel for this wire to fit in. In terms of depth, I would say it's also partially quite deep. Yes, as you can see, up to 10 centimeters here. So you would need to fill in a bit afterwards. I would say 3 to 4 meters should be completely sufficient for the wire here. As you can see, it's definitely doable. However, option number 1 wouldn't be my choice. So let's move on to option number 2, the shovel. It should also be noted that the shovel wouldn't be the optimal choice. For those of you who own a lawn edger, use that instead of the shovel because the shovel is naturally slightly curved at the front. This means even if we constantly switch sides, we end up with slight wavy lines, and we want to avoid that. We want a nice straight guide, and the lawn edger is completely flat or straight, so it's definitely better suited for this than a typical shovel. Nevertheless, let's test this method now, right next to the axe test track, so now with the shovel. In direct comparison to the axe, here are the results of the shovel. I believe there's really nothing more to say about it. As predicted, we have the typical wavy pattern, so it's not really optimal for the boundary wire. Nevertheless, in direct comparison, this channel is definitely much narrower than the one made by the axe, and in terms of depth, it's sufficient, about 5 centimeters on average. Definitely adequate. However, I wouldn't choose this option. I'd rather go for the axe unless you own a lawn edger. Now let's move on to option number 3, the first electric device in this test, namely the Makita cordless grass trimmer, the DUR 190. I'll be using this as if I were making a vertical edge cut here, so in the 90-degree position of the trimmer head. Let's see how it performs. Also worth mentioning, for such tests or when using such devices, it's always advisable to wear safety goggles to prevent any stones or debris from getting into your eyes. So let's see how it goes. Let's start with option number 3. Oh yes, the result of option number 3 is by far the worst so far, as you can see. In terms of depth, we have about a maximum of 1 centimeter here. But in terms of width, it's a solid 5 to 7 centimeters, and the grass surface is completely ruined. So for this task, the grass trimmer is absolutely not usable unless you want to completely overturn your area. But I don't think that's the goal. The goal is to safely bury the boundary wire underground, which is definitely not possible with the grass trimmer. So let's move on to option number 4. For option number 4, we also have a cordless device, namely, in this case, a Makita cordless angle grinder, the DGA 513. Also worth mentioning here, you can easily use other angle grinders such as corded devices, but in my opinion, a cordless device is definitely preferable here because you don't have a cable hanging around in the end, and you can work with the device without any problems. Additionally, safety goggles are necessary here as well, and also a specific cutting disc. Because the angle grinder is naturally optimized to work as quickly and efficiently as possible, this means cutting or grinding materials with as little friction as possible. So here, we're using a nice thin disc with a thickness of 1 millimeter. However, this doesn't necessarily help us here because I believe the wire itself is thicker than 1 millimeter, and we also need to somehow get it into the trench, but this isn't possible with this disc. What I would recommend here is a so-called joint cutter, which is essentially a cutting disc but much thicker. These come in different thicknesses, currently here at 8 millimeters, so if this works out as I imagine, we should be able to easily fit the wire into this trench. So let's see how it behaves. When I completely set the angle grinder down, i.e. pass it over the lawn surface, we have a maximum depth of about 4 centimeters. That should also be sufficient. The results of the angle grinder now look like this. I would say quite decent because you can hardly see the trench, but that also means it should quickly grow over again. Quickly checking the depth, we have about 3.5 centimeters here, so as I said, completely sufficient, and in terms of width, logically, it's as wide as the joint cutter, so 8 millimeters wide. Let's see if we can easily fit the wire in here. Well, you can't necessarily get your finger in here very well anymore, but still, a gentle push with a flat object, and the wire is definitely conveniently sunk here. I must admit, as suspected earlier, the method of the angle grinder in conjunction here with the joint cutter is definitely quite practical and effective because we have a nice discrete trench that's only 8 millimeters wide, so hardly visible, and consistently 3.5 centimeters deep, so really completely sufficient. The angle grinder itself might not be so happy about being completely sandblasted in the end, but still, the trench can definitely be seen. And now, finally, option number 5, here with the lawn edger, possibly the best option for burying the boundary wire underground. But I would say, let's wait and see. Essentially, the device should be optimally designed for this purpose because it's naturally meant to perform a nice straight cut along the lawn edge. So why shouldn't the same be possible in the middle of the lawn? Additionally, we have a nice long shaft here. We don't want to have to bend down while making the cut. The blades themselves here at the front also have sufficient depth. The whole thing can be adjusted through the wheel, and here too we have a nice guide. I'm curious to see if the width is really enough to fit the boundary wire in here. The blade itself is only about 2, maybe 2.5 millimeters thick. And now let's test this device again. Let's see how the lawn edger performs here. As you can see, I've made 2 cuts with the lawn edger right away because the whole process is definitely very swift. Anyone focusing on time should definitely opt for the lawn edger. Nevertheless, I would say let's take a closer look at the results first because appearances can be deceiving. Overall, both cuts look pretty good. Again, very neat, about 2, maybe 2.5 millimeters thick in total, and in terms of depth, adjustable due to the wheel, currently set at the highest option of about 5.5 centimeters. So here too, I would adjust the wheel down a bit to reduce the depth here. Otherwise, let's see if we can fit the boundary wire in here well. Here too, it's advisable to have something flat on hand to properly store the boundary wire here. But I would say here too, the whole thing works smoothly, and the trench is, as mentioned, very, very narrow, so perfect for laying the boundary wire. Okay, so let's conclude. Here are all the results once again, and I would say they're definitely quite representative and clear. Starting with the axe, as I said, it's with an axe, but still I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, because we have a pretty narrow cutting edge here. If I have to lay 100-200 meters of boundary wire, I'll still be sitting here tomorrow, and the whole thing is also quite strenuous. I wouldn't recommend the axe option to anyone. Similarly with a regular curved spade. Here, the cutting edge is curved, so in the end we have these nice wavy lines. I would never lay a boundary wire here. Otherwise, with a regular lawn edger, it's definitely possible. But here, the cutting edge is quite narrow, maybe 20 centimeters. Even here, I'm really busy with the spade if I want to lay 100-200 meters of boundary wire. Option number 3 was the lawn trimmer. As you can see, the result speaks for itself. So I don't need to say anything. Absolutely not suitable for laying the boundary wire. Option number 4, the angle grinder with the joint cutter. Definitely not a bad idea. Of course, you need to get a joint cutter if you don't already have one. As I said, 8mm are easily possible in this case. Perhaps use a larger device, for example 230mm in diameter, so you don't have to push the device directly on the ground. But here too, you could definitely lay the boundary wire without any problems. And finally, option number 5, with the lawn edger. Here, the results were perfect in my opinion. So really the most discreet cut, 2 to 2.5 millimeters thick, and also sufficiently deep at about 3 to 5 centimeters. And here too, you could lay the boundary wire really easily and close to the lawn edge very nicely. In summary, the lawn edger is really the best option for safely burying the boundary wire. Clearly, the device is the most expensive, but in my opinion, the investment is definitely worth it because you can naturally also create perfect lawn edges and not just lay the boundary wire. However, if you don't want to invest that much, I would recommend a joint cutter for the angle grinder. This option also works smoothly and very swiftly. And that's it for this video. As I said, I'll link all the materials and devices used in the video description below. Of course, I would appreciate it if you liked the video, then, as always, show it with a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, definitely subscribe to this channel now and activate the bell to not miss any more videos. Otherwise, thank you very much for your support. See you in the next video. Until then, goodbye.